Now we're moving to virtual museums in the 21st century, present challenges and future prospects. Now, first of all, I'd like to apologize for my co-speaker, Sorin, who couldn't make it. Let me introduce you to Sorin Hermon, Professor Hermon, from the Cyprus Institute in Cyprus. He's unable to come here because he had a problem with his flight. He just couldn't get a flight to Hong Kong. So he's asked me to speak on his behalf. So you'll see me changing hats in the middle and changing voices, so you know it's Sorin speaking and not me. My presentation is actually in two parts, or let me say, our presentation is in two parts. I'm going to describe our virtual MUSeum Transnational NETwork, and this is about where practice and theory meet for museum folk. Let me just see how many people out there are associated with a museum in any way. So it's a good part of you. Great. Okay. Because this is the people I want to be talking to. Because at the end of the day, this is an open invitation to our community to be part of this research project. Second part of the presentation are two case studies. One is the Cyprus Archaeological Museum, Nicosia, where Sorin has done some major research. And the second one is our digital Dead Sea Scrolls project that took place in our museum, in Israel Museum in Jerusalem, with the help of CTU students, interns, who I hope Isabel is here today. Yes, hello, one of our students who came over to Jerusalem, and I'll be briefly discussing this project. But before I start, I want to say thank you to the translators, folks out there, because I think you guys have done a great job. And I've learned in my career that if you don't have translators, well, you can't talk to anybody. And if you stay in your milieu, in your little comfort zone of your own language, and you don't speak any other languages, then you really need translators. And I think it's a point I'm going to make here. So the Virtual MUSeum Transnational NETwork, VMUST. And look, if you're on your computers or your mobiles, check it out now. Go in, have a look at the list of all the different partners, and see if your institution or your project or your research matches our profile, and you're very welcome to join us. It's a network of excellence, if anybody knows this term, financed by the framework projects. The European Commission, it runs over 4 years, and we have another 2 years to go. We have at the moment 18 partners in 13 countries. Now, the reason I was actually interested in this, my own doctoral research in Goldsmiths in the Media Studies Department from 2004 was investigating the impact of the museum, the virtual museum, and I came up with an idea of the MUSphere, which is the digital footprint of the museum. So this is very helpful in my own thinking. And my part of the research is that I'm now involved in research to try and identify what has happened in the last nearly 10 years since the end of my research, to understand critically what it means to be a virtual museum, a distributed museum. The terminology is irrelevant. We all have lots of names for the same thing. Because the project was accepted with the title VMUST a couple of years ago, we have to stick with the term virtual, but that's just cosmetic. So here are some of our partners, and you see there are 18 partners across Europe. I won't go through the list, you'll find it all on the website. And the associated partners, and these are people who are sitting in museums and visitor centres in different places and have a lot of experience, practical experience in the field. They're bringing their experience to this network, and we are looking at these applications critically to try and understand what it means to take cultural heritage and envelope it in new ways, some are very cutting edge, and then present it to audiences and look at the cycle of consumption, consumptions of virtual museums. We also have associate partners, and may I ask you to have a look at our list you may find yourselves in one of these categories, in which case please join this network. Everybody is welcome. And the idea is to write up a series of research definitions of the different ideas of the virtual museum. We're not acting alone. A lot of research projects that are going on, have been going on, will be going on, and we're very interested not to duplicate the work, but to learn from one another and the different projects you may know from EPOC, the Stella, the Europeana Local, which is a new project, 3D Co-Forum. There are a lot of 3D applications that we're looking at. Virtual City, Athena, which was the the project that introduced the museums into Europeana. Carrare is doing something similar with monuments, like fixed collections. Gala, Statcham, 3D TV, 3D for You, the F Museum, and Intuition. So these are parallel universes that we kind of interacting with, learning from, and contributing to. So in a nutshell, and I'll read you our little manifesto, VMUST brings together scientists from various domains to utilize their experience and knowledge for creating the Virtual Museum Research Network. The network is laying down the theoretical foundations of the virtual museum. VMUST identifies research areas for further development and is defining ideal scenarios for the virtual museum of the future. Well, nobody can really look into the future, but we are trying to get some sort of sense of where we're going. Data visualization, we've heard today from Professor Lewis, we have been celebrating here in the Alive Lab yesterday and on the different projects here that we've been seeing. Data visualization interaction is very much a part of our agenda. We see they're very powerful tools of presenting collections, objects, and experiences, including all sorts of kinds of heritage, for audiences. And that's very much part of the museum community that Harry said. At the end of the day, it's the museum audience that we need to present to. We need to have a conversation with. It doesn't matter that we document things or archive things. We actually are out there having a conversation. And if audiences aren't experiencing museum culture or museum experience in ways that are meaningful, then we're not doing the right job. So enhancing the user-level experience is paramount in our research. New forms of interaction with virtual objects, which is a lot of fun. Reflecting on cognitive and perceptive capabilities of users and enhancing the level of experience of virtual heritage. Integrating new mixed reality interfaces, wider dissemination of virtual heritage objects, and introducing, this is the social networks, Web 2 type things, introducing proactive user interfaces and its methodologies instead of symbolic, iconic systems. Okay, I think you all know where we're going. So the sort of questions that we're asking, the big questions. When is a virtual museum not a virtual museum? Okay, by understanding what we're not, it's much easier to understand what we really are. And then an even more important question. Does every museum need to have its own dedicated virtual component? Okay, that's a key question. But more important, does a virtual museum actually need a physical component? And I just want to quote here from this morning. I didn't have a chance to put this into my presentation. This is Lars from this morning, Lars Mitka from Museum Plus. I had a great, is he here, Lars? It's gone, okay. And he came up with this lovely idea. The museum is not the same thing as the building. It's the relationship between the audiences, its content and the audience. It's a tool, okay? So the museum building is a tool. That's a lovely concept. And he also mentioned that the building itself has symbolic value because it's a safe place for ideas. So this is a space where audiences can share opinions and ideas. So I thought it was really neat, actually. So that kind of helps us. These sort of comments help us in our research and help us formulate what it means to be a virtual museum and what it means for the physical museum. And then back to my own idea of the MUSphere, which is a digital footprint of the museum, what I would argue, in essence, may or may not be able to work without a physical component. On the other hand, and having said that, clearly the impressive Alive experiences that we've seen here have a robust life of their own, either with or without a physical anchoring in a permanent building. They can be transplanted, transported elsewhere, they move, they're fluent. So the question here at the end of the day is, if you're looking at this kind of experience, and if we are actually including them into the VMUST network, this means that by default, they're a virtual museum. I'm not sure if you're following this, but there's a logic here. Are you with me? A little bit. What is the boundary of this museum? How far can we push the walls out and still call it a museum? What's the essence of the idea of a museum? So we go back to the ICOM description on cultural heritage, which is we heard very nicely about yesterday from our colleague in Hong Kong, who's looking at intangible heritage, was a very important component of our virtual museum. And the ICOM description is that cultural heritage does not only embrace the tangible expressions like monuments and objects throughout the years, it also includes the living expressions like the traditions that many groups and communities worldwide have been passed down by their ancestors and will continue to pass on to their descendants, mostly by word of mouth. Although it is the motor of cultural diversity, this heritage is fragile. And we heard very clearly yesterday about intangible heritage and how important it is for the museum community who collects and who presents and documents for future generations. So this is something we were reflecting on in VMUST. How do we bring in intangible heritage? So we have to go back to the core concept, and we're looking again at the ICOM definition, which I'm sure you all know. The museum is the ICOM definition of museum, that education forms a central tenant, the raison d'être of the museum. So the ICOM statute, and this is the everything is in writing, so clearly legal speak. A museum is a non-profit permanent institution in the service of society, its development, open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. So, do we then presume that the virtual museum is just for education? Can we dare to say it's possible to develop a virtual museum for edutainment or even fun? Well, I don't have an answer for that, but these are sort of questions that we're interested in the VMUST project, and these are what we are looking at. So I want to call up now my two case studies, and the first one is Sorin's project. I hope it works. Okay. The Cyprus Virtual Museum. Has anybody been to this fantastic archaeological museum, Nicosia? You know the collections there? Oh, one person. Brilliant, wonderful museum, fantastic collections. They're very much jumbled up in glass cases, and they're kind of mislabeled and not very clear to navigate around a very small, very compressed museum. But the collections are stunning. So the Cyprus Museum is addressing the following challenges. Looking at the virtual recontextualization of museum objects, but not only museum exhibits, but objects that have been used, that once used for people in the past. The idea of bringing people in, visitors in, and describing objects and putting back into their context. The other goal that they're doing in terms of the visualization is to go behind the scenes, the museum, and looking at the scientific work and supporting the scientific staff, the conservators, the curators and archaeologists in their own work. So they do this with some very nice tools, actually, a very, very nice lab, and they implement these following technologies: high definition and accurate 3D models, iPad-based platforms for investigating 3D models and related metadata, the annotation using 3D models, and personalized access to information based on user types, profiling, etc. And augmented reality for introducing information with a rich semantic level of descriptive metadata, and 3D semantic object repository. At the same time, and I just want to show you here on my iPad, we're looking at also very low-res solutions. And if you can see here, I was going to put it onto the I don't know if you can see the screen. This is a local project, a local application on iPhone, on iPad. Can you see this? Is it possible? I'll make it larger. Okay. Yeah, it's basically a little figurine that we have in the collection, little Greek figurine, and it's created on something that anybody can do themselves. It's a program called Catch123D. Catch123D. You can download it to your iPhone, I actually took this shot on my iPhone. I put the figure, I suspended it in on a string, like a transparent string, and I moved it around and took 40 shots. The whole thing took 2 minutes. I sent it up to this application server somewhere wherever it is, and it came back to my iPhone which I transferred to the iPad. And it means that within 2 minutes, I can have a 3D form in low res. It's really nice. And this is something that we're looking at in the VMUS project, how to introduce 3D forms in simple ways for museums that don't have the resources to do anything as extravagant and as beautiful and as wonderful as we've been seeing here. I just want to change my presentation over here to our other case study. This is from my own museum, and this is where I am appreciative of our Hong Kong interns. I want to discuss with you our project of the digital Dead Sea Scrolls, which is actually now in Chinese. So this is where I changed my hat from being Sorin back to myself, curator of new media in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This is one of our case studies. Looking at case studies is very helpful to bring theory into the real world. It's very nice theorizing things, but then to actually apply the theory, you need to go out there and get your hands dirty and do stuff. So I'm actually very lucky that I'm full-time curator of new media in our museum. My hands get very dirty on projects all day long, the website and all the kiosks and all the information centers, the audio guide, the website in several languages, and these Google projects. We've now done 2 Google projects, this Dead Sea Scrolls project and, of course, the Google Art Museum. So we've had a lot of experience, good experience with Google, and hopefully we're going into a 3rd project soon. This is on top of all the other things we do. But stepping back from actually creating things and then moving into the theoretical side means you kind of stop doing things and coming up with solutions, but you start asking questions. And VMUS looks at this stuff and says, well, why did you do it? Who's it for? Do they get the message? Are you using the right vehicle to deliver it? So it's very nice to be on one side. When I go to Cyprus, I begin to think, which is really nice. And when I go back home, I'm doing. I'm not thinking that much, I'm just doing. Deadlines and all this sort of stuff, so it's very important. So this is an example of real life Getting My Hands Dirty project. We launched it about a year ago. Has anybody heard of this project, the Digital Dead Sea Scrolls project? Yeah. It made incredible waves when it launched last year. It was taken up really, really successfully. It's a parallel project from the Google Art project, in that it deals with archived material as opposed to a museum experience. And what we put online were 5 of our Dead Sea Scrolls from our collection in Jerusalem. Now, has anybody heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Yeah? Yes. Well, I always like to know who hasn't, and there's quite a few who haven't, so I will come to this. The Israel Museum is very lucky to hold a collection of 11 full scrolls, 5 of which were ready for photography, very high-level, high-resolution photography, by a photographer using a Leica camera. And these 5 scrolls were put online within this framework of the Google Digital Dead Sea Scrolls project. Basically, the story of the scrolls, anybody who's come to our museum will hear our docent tell the story. A young shepherd was walking in the desert near the caves by the Dead Sea in Qumran, middle of the desert, throws a stone into a cave, hears a clinking sound. We don't know if this is true, but we do tell this story to anybody who comes through. Here's the sound of clinking ceramics and thinks, there must be a treasure in there. And our little shepherd goes in, and 1947, and discovers the Dead Sea Scrolls, the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, in clay jars. And they're brought to the dealer in Bethlehem. They'll then, through a series of interesting kind of trade routes, go via Syria to New York, where they're actually sold to the Israel Museum. And quite a nice story, which I won't go into. So this is the story of our scrolls. And we have Neil in the audience, who could tell this story much better than I can, having written his fantastic book on the Dead Sea Scrolls, but perhaps you'll talk to him directly for more information. But the point is that we put the scrolls online in very high resolutions. The Isaiah scroll is the book of the Bible. And we're looking here at a high resolution photo. I'm not doing this live because wasn't sure what the connection was, but we were able to magnify the scroll so closely that you can almost smell the parchment. You can almost kind of see all the stitching and the quality of the calligraphy. So it's very exciting to do. But because this is the book of the Living Bible, the Isaiah scroll, it is a very important book from the Bible for the Jewish community, the Christian community, and the Muslim community around the world. And we've made it accessible in a new way in that we added what we call a pop-up window. You'll see here a little kind of menu. There are 66 chapters altogether, in columns, 66 columns, 55 chapters. And you can actually do a search on your favorite chapter. And when you click on it, a little pop-up window appears with the English translation of the Hebrew, which means that you can search for the right verse, chapter, and you can read it in English, in the parallel to the Hebrew. And let me introduce you to Dr. Dolfo Reutmann. He's our curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he's the person behind this project. You may just see here, I don't know how clear the screen is, but if you look here, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls are written in Hebrew. One of the ways of writing the Lord's name, and this is quite an important point, I'll get back to it in a minute with the social media, there are 4 dots here in the community scroll here. And this is a way of writing the Lord's name in Hebrew, which is such a powerful name that you're not allowed to write down the full name. So it's represented in this case by 4 dots. So this appears in the community scroll, and these are the sort of things that, when they went online, were a cause for lots of online conversations in our project. Let me just show you a brief video. It's a very nice little animation that our curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls is a very serious gentleman, very academic. He agreed to be turned into this kind of animation for the project, as did the director of the Google office in Haifa, who's also another professor. So it's actually quite nice. It's a 2-minute video. So when you go and look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, don't forget to look at this. This is what happened within the first week of us launching the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this was really, really weird. The project actually went viral. It went absolutely exploded in terms of what happened in those first 4 days. After 4 days, we received 1 million unique users. And it was very lucky it was on the Google Cloud. We'd worked all this on the Google Cloud because we would have just crashed within the first day. And these are the different, this is the list of the media uptake in that first week. So you see here, it was syndicated by Bloomberg, Associated Press, and it went on to CNN and all the rest of it. So these are the kind of channels by country that picked it up within the first week. I'm just going a bit fast here. Where am I? Okay, Israel. This is the US, Canada, UK, Spain. All these are links to newspapers, broadcasting authorities, television programs, whatever. Sweden, Switzerland, getting to the end. I printed this out once for my director. It came to 8 A4 pages on very small font. Okay, Belgium, Netherlands, we're nearly 2/3 down. South Africa, Ukraine, Asian Pacific, China, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Look how well we were received in Hong Kong, Latin America. Okay, so we were very excited by this. We didn't quite get it, though. We weren't quite sure what happened here. But it was great. After a week, we stopped adding the media inserts into this page because it was getting really silly. But we did look at some of the things and try to understand what was happening. Why had this become so popular? So the sort of things CNN were talking about, making the 5 Dead Sea Scrolls searchable. Bloomberg, when the Dead Sea Scrolls went online was Google the magic word? Or was it Isaiah that was their magic word? Or the Dead Sea Scrolls? What was this, cachet that was become so interesting to people? So I did a bit of kind of quantitative as opposed to qualitative analysis to have a look to see what people were doing with this material. CNN, I'm going backwards, sorry. You've seen that. Oh, I was actually very happy when it went onto the front page of the BBC. So that was really good. All my family started writing to me, did you know it was on the BBC? And we were all interviewed all the time. We couldn't leave our offices until somebody pulled up and said, oh, it's this television company, this interview is coming. This is Sweden, Japan. We actually got a lot of interest from Japan. We think it's from the CNN Japan article. I'll go into that in a minute. China Times, we made front page. So what happened in those first 4 days? We had over 1 million unique visitors, over 2.5 million page views and page visits. And people came from 213 countries. When I told our director, he said, there aren't 213 countries. What are you talking about? So I actually gave him the list, because when you do your Google Analytics, you can see. And he said, oh, you're right. So where do they come from? If you look here, mostly it was the United States, but Japan is second on the list. What was happening? Why were we so popular there? Canada, Netherlands, Croatia, United Kingdom, Brazil, France, Germany, Spain, Argentina, and Israel. These are our top 10. Israel only made it number 12. So what was happening? I don't know if you can see the colors on this map, but when you see a Google map and something in green, that means somebody has visited you, which meant that every country in the world except for a couple in Central Africa, and I think this is Iran here, I'm not quite sure exactly. A couple of countries weren't greened at all. I mean, obviously these are the popular places, but everybody around the world, there was somebody who'd come to visit the project, which I found fascinating, and so did everybody, so did my colleagues. So we were tracking this sort of thing, who was interested in this and possibly why. So the languages, mostly, originally our website was in English, so we had English speakers, and we had a lot of Spanish speakers. We had Spanish speakers from Spain, and we had Spanish speakers from South America. A lot of Japanese, again, you can see in this category, Brazilians, French, and Germans. So that's our top 10 again. And then we got another wave of media response. The Virtual Dead Sea Scrolls gets more than 1 million hits in just a week. So then we had another round of interviews, so this carried on, and that's sort of a later. Okay, what was interesting, I was interested to see where they'd come from. And if you look here, Facebook, for example, brought in more traffic than Google had done. So what does that say for the G name? Does that mean that Facebook are really taking over Google? Things like this are always interested. So look down the list, and our top hits, and we came from the BBC, our own website, Washington Post, YouTube, Fox News, El País. I was actually thrilled. Here we go with the Japan, CNET here, another Japanese company. I was happy when the Huffington Post took it up. That was really nice. History Channel, and the list continues. Oh, I had that pointed out. I'd forgotten about that. So what was happening when people came to the site? And we always look at the bounce rate. Does anybody know what the bounce rate means? How many people know bounce rate? Oh, good. So what happens, people come onto the site, and if you get a very high bounce rates, we do here, this is Docomo, these are our Japanese visitors, note. A lot of people leave the site very quickly. These are the mobile platforms that came to the site, which means that those who'd come, all these hundreds of thousands who'd come from Japan, had a really bad experience because they had a really bad bounce rate. And we look at their platform and see that NTT Docomo, we didn't support them, which we only found out later. So that wasn't really good. But the iPad and the iPhone had a pretty good bounce rate. That's basically a good bounce rate. So we're quite pleased that we were delivering in a way that was making sense for our audiences. So that was 6 months ago. I was actually more interested, what were our successes? Why were people coming to the site? So I looked at the numbers, the relative numbers, and I see that the Isaiah scroll was the most important. And then after that, the War Scroll was quite popular. The video that Google had prepared for us came in third, and the other 3 scrolls came in afterwards. And only then did people look at about the project and the videos. Each scroll we prepared a video. They were less popular, and all the information that we'd written about the text in the background, for example, the media page that I showed you, were far less popular. So it's interesting to see what was happening. People were coming in, going straight to the Isaiah scroll, clicking on it, reading the English translation. We followed all this and were very happy with what we saw. We also had a little kind of conversation going on the scrolls on the page. We had our own little application. It was a Google application that disappeared I think it was about 6 months ago. Suddenly it disappeared. Luckily, we'd archived all the conversations. We had to move to a new platform, but they didn't tell us. Google comes and Google goes. So they gave us an application that we were using for conversations, and then it disappeared, and now we have something else. So we had lovely conversations going on, and still going on. And the sort of things, we had our own community, in that they were dedicated. It wasn't like a Facebook community or people tweeting. This is the people who were on the site. And the sort of comments we had were things like, Lord, it's amazing. I love what you've done for us. I'm so pleased and blessed by this site and the site of the anointed word of God. Actually, this is the prophet Isaiah speaking, probably God through Isaiah, but it's Isaiah's voice. One of my favorite versions of the Bible is exactly the same words, those Dead Sea Scrolls. Wow, is all I can say, precious. And I'm Bubba Nicholson, Stevie Spielberg's friend, and I want to offer my congratulations to you on this magnificent achievement. I hope that you managed to publish all the text quickly. It would be nice to see the oldest Christian Bible and the Quran in Israel, along with other fine old books of Israel on these pages. Oh, that was a really nice comment. Amazing! And to be able to view this online, connecting Century 1 to Century 21. Wow! And then I'm speechless. And this week, I went back to pick up some new texts and new kind of conversations. And I got so moved by them. People were blessing us. I was too embarrassed to put this up. And another woman had written, like last week before I left my office, I come to this site. I don't know why I'm crying. So we're obviously doing something right. And then we had these conversations. Now, the curator, Adolfo, and our team were really worried that we'd have to start answering kind of questions that people were asking on the site. This is very sensitive material. So people were asking, was the lost Gospel of Thomas in his writings somewhere? If not, is something that might be published. Thank you so much for putting this online. This is just what the internet was invented for. So we were thinking, do we have to start going into this conversation, like this philosophy? And then Ray piped out an answer for us, which was great. The Dead Sea Scrolls are mostly from before the times of Jesus. The Gospel of Thomas was a part of the manuscripts found in Egypt. So he came up with this answer on our behalf, which was great. So we had our community talking to each other. We didn't have to intervene with these kind of philosophical arguments we weren't equipped for. This isn't our area. So here's somebody saying, okay, I don't get this. There's so much information missing. Who ate the bottom of these scrolls? How are we going to figure out the missing parts? The temple scroll is a very long 6-meter scroll, which had been kind of wrapped up for 2,000 years, and it had eroded at the bottom, presumably sitting in the ceramic jar, but it had eroded on the outside. 5 more minutes. Eroded on the outside, and as you unraveled the scroll, you can see it online, the whole scroll. The bottom is kind of, at the beginning, is pretty eaten. As you get to the middle, which was preserved in the scrolling, it's a full text. So this interested people. Well, we can't. The question is, how do we find the missing parts? This is a really important question. And here comes Jeremy. Well, we can't. This is the frustration of studying ancient documents. We're very pleased that Jeremy answered. But then he came up with the question. Thank you for allowing the public to view this. I am, however, a little confused by the fact that you use the term BCE instead of BC while referring to before Christ. And somebody answers on our behalf. It's a new hip way that scholars are using the term BCE, before the Common Era. Okay, so these are acronyms that we use in our collection. And one more. Is there any information about Mary Magdalene in these scrolls? And the answer was no. Here comes Ray. No, they were written before she was born. So we have a great conversation, this community talking to each other, which I think is what we want. We didn't know we were going to be doing this. We were very relieved that we didn't have to jump in the time with these theocratic kind of conversations. So these are kind of members of our community that we've. I'll just go very quickly through some of the tweets. I won't read them. They're really nice, actually. But I read all the tweets and I analysed them and I looked at what people were saying, and it was actually really exciting. But when somebody from the Berkman Center tweets, and he has his own 2,000 people following him, and he says, the Dead Sea Scrolls online, biblical texts, haven't been viewed on this many tablets since 70 AD. That's pretty neat. But the nice thing is, it's been retweeted and it's going around. And because it's the Berkman Center, people read this. They follow him. So he's tweeted on our behalf, and a lot of people were tweeting on our behalf. I looked at all the blogs, and I read what people had been writing, and I went to all the YouTubes. I nearly cried with the YouTube sites. People had taken the videos, or they'd taken the material off the site and created their own videos, and they were commenting on this experience and perhaps showing it in church or synagogue or school or to family or something, but uptaking the material and creating their own stuff, which I thought was great. So that's what we were trying to do. And there were sort of parodies. Okay. And this is Taiwan News, which I thought was quite exciting. I was interviewed by NTD, for those who were looking at the big signs on Nathan Street. Mary Birdsong had something to say. Just, I don't know if you can read this. It's 2011, and you can now read the Dead Sea Scrolls online, or an iPhone, or an iPad, or a Kindle. Believed by most scholars to be written between the years. Hold on, where is that phrase in it? Sorry, I can't find the right phrase here. Never mind. Anyway, so this is the Washington Post. The Washington Post had written it up very beautifully in their article, which had then been syndicated. But then they started blogging as well, so that was also good. And the Huffington Post, which is my favourite. And this is the one I wanted to read to you. This is Being Theo by Theodora Chester. Can't believe so many of you are here and tweeting when you could be reading the Dead Sea Scrolls online. And she calls herself a lapsed writer collecting distractions. So, you know you're going into people's hearts. You're going out there and they're tweeting on your behalf. But the best is yet to come. And here's why I say thank you to our translators, where I started. You see I'm closing my cycle. Started with the translators. I thank you. And I thank again my translators for translating this entire site into Chinese. Ta-da! We have a live Chinese site we're very proud of. You can see all the videos, you can go to read the scrolls, and the entire site has been translated by CityU interns from but this year and last year. Sorry. Hold on. Where are your names? Ooh. There, okay, sorry. So I want to thank Olivia So-Yin Wai, Cynthia Mai Hu Wan, and I understand they're working today, they couldn't come. Isabel, who's sitting with us. Thank you, Isabel. Zita Lau Mipe, who's taking an exam today, so they couldn't join us. But these four ladies came to our museum and sat through the hot summer in a tiny office and translated the entire project into Chinese. So we're very pleased with that. So you can go and check it out in Chinese. And while they were there, we were all interviewed by CCTV.
And now let's take a look at the world-famous religious relic, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are the earliest non-biblical texts in existence today, dating back to the 4th century BC. Studied by religious scholars and historians for decades, they will soon be accessible in Chinese. And Middle East correspondent Stephanie Freed has this story.
When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered by a shepherd in these desert caves in the late 1940s, historians called it the find of the century. 972 texts, including 15,000 parchment fragments written in Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Nabatean, were extracted, analyzed, pieced together, and translated, then moved here to this museum for safekeeping. Beneath this dome behind me, underneath the ground, is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are housed. Now, the dome itself is shaped like the lid of an urn to symbolize the urn that the scrolls were found inside the caves. The 2,300-year-old relics preserved in cool temperatures and dim light were until recently only accessible here in Jerusalem. But thanks to technology and global cooperation, they can now be viewed online. And by summer's end, they will also be available in Mandarin.
We realised there's potentially a lot of people that we could be talking to. If this was popular in English, what would happen if it was in Chinese?
Hong Kong-based linguistic students are spending a combined 2,000 hours on site translating the scrolls and transferring their work to the web. It is a rewarding but tedious project that at times has necessitated consulting with their professor back home.
Priest, the term of priest, it is difficult to translate in Chinese because it is not quite common to have the priest term in Chinese. So we have to think about it. And after discussion, so we have to add some footnotes below to the Chinese to add more some background information.
Steeped in Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist tradition, China might not seem the ideal venue for biblical writings. But the expert here says the scrolls have mass appeal.
Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are spiritual writings, and they speak about, in some way, the meaning of life, about divine forces, about demons, even for people who don't belong to the Jewish Christian civilization. Still, they are able to find meaning in these ancient spiritual writings.
When these students return home in a few weeks, they take with them inspiration for preserving their own history.
We might want to bring this idea of how to really digitalize all the cultural heritage objects and back to Hong Kong.
Just one thing I want to say here. I was so proud of myself that I tweeted in Chinese. But I just thank our students because they did all the hard work. And thank you for sharing this with me.